Thank you so much for being with us today. We very much appreciate you participating in the proceeding and in the hearing to share your perspectives with us. I will turn things over to our Vice Chair of Telecom, Mr. Scott, to start with the questioning. Thank you.
And thanks very much, Mr. Santamaria, for being here. It's nice to see you again. Your submission makes the point that there's a thriving group of Canadian digital-first creators that are telling their stories and making great content. Is part of your thesis that the digital-first creators are increasingly carrying some of the load of championing Canadian culture, and that maybe it's okay for us as regulators to do less, not just in terms of regulating the digital-first folks, but across the entire broadcasting system?
Yes, I think that's the case. When the Broadcasting Act was passed a long time ago now, in its before the recent amendments, the digital online UGC content simply didn't exist. I think it certainly is and has become part of the landscape to the extent that the Act itself now defines online content as broadly as it does to include, certainly include UGC and almost all audio and audiovisual content online. I think it's time that regulation took into account the fact that it is there, and it is contributing in significant ways, I would say, to the objectives of the Act in terms of producing and originating and making available Canadian content, not only in Canada, but to the world. Many of these young, and they are mostly young, digital first providers, content creators, have revenues that come primarily from foreign audiences, from foreign viewing. They are among the most exported services or content on YouTube.
Thank you for that. And so I'm trying to get straight in my head, to what degree are we talking then about two parallel ecosystems, or are there, like, what are the connection points? So or to rephrase, what are the decisions we might make on one side? So a decision we make with regards to Netflix or a conventional broadcaster that might have carry-on impacts that are felt on the digital creator side. Are these separate things, separate streams contributing in different ways, or where do they connect?
I'm not really sure I understand the question, but let me try. Okay. I would say that on streaming services like Netflix and Amazon and Disney and others, the content is certainly more of a professional nature, and it is produced and acquired in quite different ways. When it comes to user-generated content on social media, the originators and producers and creators are often individuals. They may be groups of individuals. They may be people who are in many countries collaborating at the same time. So the notion that you could apply the same Canadian content concepts or definitions in these two different worlds, it would be a bit of a stretch, I would say. Does that come close to your question?
It does, and I think I'll refine it a bit further than just to say, are there things you're worried that we could do, rules that you're worried we can impose on Netflix or traditional broadcasters that would be deleterious to digital?
I think the real concern is rules that might apply to social media. I think that's where it gets complicated and difficult for UGC content. To my knowledge, most of the streamers, so Netflix and Disney and Amazon, etc., don't carry UGC content. UGC content is either provided on the creator's own networks or on websites rather, or on social media. So it's really in the area of social media where things get complicated for user-generated content, because anything any regulation that seeks to prioritize some Canadian content, and then you need to go down the difficult path of identifying it on social media. Any regulation that serves to try and prioritize that ends up almost inevitably deprioritizing other user-generated content. So you end up in this awkward situation if I'm a creator of comedy on either on my own social media website or on YouTube, for example. I have to be concerned that something that is done to promote CanCon in the traditional definition ends up perforce deprioritizing or making my content possibly undiscoverable. Is that
very helpful and very clear? So I think I'll pivot away a bit from user-generated content. So earlier this week, I've asked a couple people now about what I'm calling the potluck problem, where we have kind of a wide range of objectives that we're meant to achieve under the Broadcasting Act. There are lots of folks that are willing and able to contribute one way or another. But if everyone has maximum flexibility to contribute however they see fit, we might end up with kind of everyone brings potato salad to the party. So how do we make sure that we get all of our objectives met without, with kind of a minimum amount of prescriptiveness in terms of you need to contribute exactly this amount of this type of thing? Like how much flexibility can we let into the system and still ensure that we're hitting all of our wide breadth of goals?
Well, the objectives in the Broadcasting Act are so many and varied that I think it's difficult to say that regulation is really in a position to try and achieve them all. But what is really interesting, I have found, is that the interplay of market forces and digital technologies and the internet have proven to be a remarkably successful means of generating such a wide variety of content that standing back and looking at the objectives of the Act, I think it's fair to say that those objectives are being achieved more today as a result of market forces and the internet than perhaps they ever have been. I would say that I don't think the Commission needs to get more specific in regulation. I think rather by being more flexible, by allowing businesses to present the kind of content that they want, and not just, businesses, creators, broadcasters, streamers, they all have developed their own niches. They all have their own particular content, specialties and interests and audiences. I think that in itself speaks to diversity and the range of objectives in the Act in a quite significant way.
Thank you. So you also spoke about the flexibility within the points system. What do you think of the idea of some kind of sliding scale where those who invest in projects with greater points receive greater credit, but that others who, if half points equals half credit, more points equals more credit? Would that be meaningful, or is that a degree of complexity that doesn't necessarily deliver any tangible benefit?
Well, I guess it depends on the purpose of the scale. I would say that a scale makes a great deal of sense in a situation where you're looking at public financing, for example, whether that's from the CMF or the Canadian tax credit, which is more valuable than the regular production tax credit. So, I know that doesn't involve the CRTC in particular, but I could see a sliding scale, and to some degree it already exists, where the CMF and not this tax credit, but not CAVCO, but the CMF certainly requires a higher point scale for its public financing. Similarly, you could have a situation where there is a higher there is a scale that applies. Cavco could adopt a similar situation if they chose to. But I think in terms of the commission is in a different situation, in my view, because as the regulator, they are not providing for public financing. So I guess I think what maybe you're suggesting is that to the extent that Canadian content certified by the CRTC has a greater point scale, achieves higher points in the scheme, that would have some regulatory benefit associated to it. Is that what you have in mind?
That's essentially it. So it's almost like either a multiplier or a discount against your CPE. So with some types of content, for example, if you're hitting a 10 out of 10, would you get full, every dollar invested in a 10 out of 10 project gets you $1 credit towards your CPE, but you would have the option of 5 out of 10 points, and then you would get 50 cents on an invested dollar against your CPE.
I kind of like the idea of a bonus point. I'm not sure that I like the idea of, I think if it's Canadian content, it should be accepted as Canadian content. To be honest, I haven't thought through the model that you're suggesting, but just at face value, my inclination would be to say if it's Canadian content, it meets the bar. If it achieves a particularly high level and the Commission believes that that warrants some additional credit towards CPE, that might be a useful solution. But again, it's a little complex because there's the interplay between the Commission's certification of Canadian content, which in the future environment under Bill C-11, I suspect will be greater than is currently the case, because so much of certification now is based on the combination of CAVCO and CMF. But going forward, with all of these foreign entities involved in producing CanCon, I believe that that's going to have to, the balance there will change, will shift.
Thanks. And my last question from me. If one of our goals is to promote the creation of stories that are for, about, and told by Canadians, would it be weird to have those stories owned by large foreign companies?
Well, that situation already exists. It exists in two ways. First, it exists in the concept of international co-productions, where international co-productions involve the sharing of intellectual property rights, which I believe in that context corresponds to the investment, the financing share. So, I mean, the whole scheme for certifying international co-productions as Canadian is quite different from the scheme applied by the CRTC and CAVCO and the CMF. I believe Telefilm is the body that makes recommendations to CAVCO and CMF to determine to recommend whether an international co-production meets the appropriate criteria. But in that context, and as well in the CRTC's context of trying to remember what they're called, the Commission has a category of co-productions, or they're not called co-productions, they're co-ventures? That's the one, co-venture. Yeah, I mean, in there as well, there is flexibility now for a level of foreign ownership of the intellectual property. So, and we've also seen in other jurisdictions, in the UK, in Denmark, in other European jurisdictions, and that was documented in the report, the DeRosa report, that was done first for the CMF and then updated for the Streamers organization. Canada is among the few countries in the world that require domestic ownership for certification of domestic content. So, no, I don't think it's problematic. I think what you need to ensure is that a production meets a level of all of the different criteria that you bring to bear. Domestic ownership could be one of them, but I do not believe that it needs to be mandatory.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a couple more questions from the panel. I will turn things over to the Vice Chair of Broadcast.
Good morning, good afternoon, I should say. I'm in the wrong time zone. So you suggest that the Commission should strive to do no harm, which is always a good piece of advice for a regulator. But in that context, what do you think the Commission should do to, on the one hand, limit regulatory burden on foreign online platforms, but also ensuring that they contribute to the creation and presentation of audiovisual content in a market they benefit from? Where's the sweet spot?
Well, I think it's fair to consider, for the CRTC to consider the kinds of contributions that are already being made. Independent of any regulation, what we have seen, and for example, the CMPA's report shows that foreign sources, which at this point is almost certainly primarily foreign streamers, are actually contributing more, investing more in Canadian English language fiction than are Canadian public and private broadcasters combined. And when you look at the CMPA report, you'll see that that's true of some other content genres as well. When you look at the overall data in the latest CMPA profile, you'll see that foreign investment in Canadian content, although all foreign investment in production in Canada has declined, foreign investment in Canadian content is still at 15% of the total of foreign investment. That is consistent across, or about the average across the last 10 years shown in the data. The other factor that I think is important, and I do believe needs to be taken into account, is that foreign investment in so-called on location or service productions has provided huge support to the development and sustaining of a film and video production industry in Canada that is world-class and certainly would not be able to be supported by the domestic industry alone. To my mind, all of those things contribute to ultimately to the production and exhibition of Canadian content, and should be taken into account. So, and all of those things contribute in a way that domestic broadcasters don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure I see the connection between foreign investment in Canada and as a location, and foreign investment in content that is Canadian and culturally relevant to Canadians. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Well, I'll try. Yeah. If Disney is investing in a production based in Alberta or Toronto or Vancouver, they are spending an awful lot of money on local facilities and crews and sometimes post-production. They will hire local actors. They will hire a variety of local creators of one kind or another, even if the production itself does not meet Canadian content requirements. That activity in Canada is helping to sustain an industry at an extremely high level of global competitiveness that otherwise would not be able to exist. So it's almost as though you might make a comparison as it's helping to support the infrastructure that enables the cultural content at a level that otherwise would not be possible. Does that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. We will go over to Commissioner Naidu.
Thank you. The Shaw Rocket Fund emphasized yesterday that Canadian financial and creative control is essential in their view to ensure that Canadian values are reflected in content. And they say that producers can reinvest in future production. TCIS, however, does not believe that IP should be necessarily kept in the hands of Canadians. So how does your position align with the Broadcasting Act's objectives to strengthen Canadian expression and support Canadian creators?
Well, what we have seen, we have seen foreign investment in Canada contribute to those objectives in a number of ways, as we've just discussed. To my mind, to my mind, I think the behavior of capital is more important than its source. And certainly that is the position that we've adopted when it comes to international co-productions and co-ventures, where we see productions that are very significantly Canadian and recognized as such, but nonetheless with very significant investment from foreign actors. We've also seen situations where in productions like Anne and Anne with an E and Alias Grace and Travelers and Between. Each of those productions was a situation where a foreign streamer agreed to take world rights up front, gave the Canadian broadcaster domestic rights for 1 or 2 years. And there was, in all of those circumstances, it was clear that foreign investment was quite huge. And once the period of foreign distribution was over, the Canadian company may have retained the rights, but I guess you got to wonder what the value might be at that stage, unless it's a hugely popular show that's going to be repeated over and over again. So, and as we've seen in other jurisdictions, it's not clear once you have international distribution and international streaming. Once it doesn't appear to be the case that most jurisdictions are concerned about domestic ownership. Is that?
Thank you very much. Those are all my questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you for appearing before us today. We would like to turn things back over to you for any concluding remarks. Thank you.
I guess just as a final comment, I would say that the Act enables a level of regulation that is more intrusive than is required to achieve desired outcomes in a highly competitive marketplace where distribution is global and Canadians are benefiting from global distribution. And so we support regulation that is proportional to its purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much.